Spring 1986. Lakewood, Oregon. On a Saturday afternoon in late April 1986, 11-year-old Ethan Cooper left his family home on Maple Street in Lakewood, Oregon, riding his red Schwinn bicycle toward Clearwater Lake. The spring weather had drawn children outdoors, and Ethan had arranged to meet friends near the lake's public beach area. His mother, Jennifer Cooper, watched from the front porch as her son pedaled away, waving goodbye. It would be the last time she would see him. When Ethan failed to return by dinner time, concern rippled through the Cooper household. Jennifer contacted the families of Ethan's friends, only to discover that none of them had seen him that day. The meeting at the lake had apparently never taken place. By 8 o'clock that evening, with daylight fading and still no sign of their son, the Coopers contacted the Lakewood Police Department. "So glad to have you here. Comment your city so I can bring cases from your region and also know where you're watching me from." Detective Michael Hayes arrived at the Cooper residence within the hour. He took detailed notes about Ethan's appearance, clothing, and the distinctive red bicycle. The boy stood 4 feet 7 inches tall, with brown hair and hazel eyes. He had been wearing a blue jacket, jeans, and white sneakers. The bicycle had a small dent on the rear fender and reflective tape on the handlebars. Search efforts began immediately. By midnight, dozens of volunteers had joined law enforcement officers in combing the areas around Clearwater Lake. Flashlights cut through the darkness as searchers called Ethan's name across the wooded trails and shoreline. The lake itself, spanning over 200 acres, presented a particularly challenging search area. The water remained cold from winter, and visibility beneath the surface was limited. Throughout the following week, the search intensified. Lakewood had never experienced anything like this before. The tight-knit community of approximately 15,000 residents rallied together. Local businesses closed early so employees could join search parties. Flyers with Ethan's photograph appeared in every store window, on telephone poles, and in mailboxes throughout the county. Detective Hayes and his team interviewed dozens of people. Ethan's school teachers described him as a friendly, responsible student who rarely caused trouble. Classmates confirmed he had mentioned plans to meet friends at the lake, though the details remained vague. Investigators questioned registered individuals with criminal histories in the area, but no solid leads emerged. The lake underwent extensive searches. Divers explored the murky depths near the shore, focusing on areas where a child might have encountered trouble. Boats with sonar equipment scanned deeper sections. Bloodhounds tracked scents through the surrounding forest. Every search ended without results. As days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. The case consumed Detective Hayes, who worked 18-hour days pursuing every possible lead. Tips flooded the police hotline, but each one led nowhere. Some callers reported seeing a boy matching Ethan's description in neighboring towns, prompting investigations that ultimately proved fruitless. The Cooper family's anguish deepened with each passing day. Jennifer struggled to maintain normalcy for Ethan's younger sister, 8-year-old Mia, while privately wrestling with devastating grief. Her husband, Robert, took leave from his job at the local manufacturing plant, spending his days searching areas that official search parties had already covered multiple times. By summer, the intensive search operations had scaled back, though the case remained open. Detective Hayes refused to give up, but with no physical evidence, no witnesses, and no body, the investigation had reached an impasse. The file on Ethan Cooper's disappearance grew thick with reports, interviews, and dead ends. Years passed, and the case became one of Oregon's most haunting unsolved mysteries. The red Schwinn bicycle remained in the Cooper family basement, a painful reminder of the son who never came home. Jennifer could never bring herself to dispose of it, holding on to the impossible hope that somehow, someday, Ethan would return. The community never forgot. Each year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, volunteers gathered at Clearwater Lake to renew the search and keep Ethan's memory alive. But as the 1980s gave way to the 1990s and then the new millennium, the truth about what happened that April afternoon remained hidden. Somewhere beneath the calm surface of Clearwater Lake, secrets waited in the depths, preserved in cold water and darkness. Secrets that would stay hidden for 37 years, until nature itself would force them into the light and change everything the community thought they knew about that terrible spring day in 1986. Summer 2023, Lakewood, Oregon. 37 years after Ethan Cooper vanished, the Pacific Northwest faced one of the most severe droughts in recorded history. Throughout the summer of 2023, temperatures soared to unprecedented levels, while rainfall remained virtually non-existent. Rivers that had flowed for centuries began to dry up. Reservoirs dropped to critical levels. And Clearwater Lake, the body of water that had been central to a community's greatest tragedy, began revealing secrets it had held for decades. By late July, the water level at Clearwater Lake had dropped more than 40 feet below normal. The receding shoreline exposed beaches that hadn't seen sunlight in generations. Tree stumps from forests that existed before the lake was formed emerged from the mud. Old fishing equipment, lost anchors, and discarded items from decades past littered the newly exposed lakebed. Local residents who had lived in Lakewood their entire lives found themselves walking on ground that had been underwater for as long as anyone could remember. The transformation was both fascinating and unsettling. Geologists and environmental scientists descended on the area to study the phenomenon, while curious locals explored the expanded shoreline with a mixture of wonder and concern. Patrick Sullivan, a 58-year-old construction worker and lifelong Lakewood resident, had fished Clearwater Lake since childhood. On a sweltering afternoon in early August, he ventured out to a section of the lake that had previously been considered deep water, now accessible by foot across cracked, dried earth. Patrick was searching for a new fishing spot, hoping the drought might have concentrated fish in the remaining deeper sections. As he walked across the exposed lakebed, something caught his attention approximately 200 yards from what used to be the shoreline. Metallic reflections glinted in the afternoon sun. At first, Patrick assumed it was just another piece of debris, perhaps an old boat motor or discarded appliance. But as he approached, the shape became more defined and considerably larger than he had anticipated. What Patrick discovered stopped him in his tracks. Partially embedded in dried mud and silt was the roof and rear section of a vehicle. The exposed portions showed significant corrosion and were covered in layers of lake sediment, but the basic structure remained intact. This was not just any piece of junk. This was an automobile that had been submerged for a very long time. Patrick immediately contacted the Lakewood Police Department. Within 30 minutes, officers arrived at the scene, including Detective Sarah Morrison, who had joined the department 15 years earlier and had studied every cold case file in the system, including the Ethan Cooper disappearance. As officers secured the area with yellow tape, word spread rapidly through the small community. By evening, dozens of residents had gathered at the lake, standing at a distance as police divers prepared to examine the vehicle more closely. The atmosphere was tense with speculation. Clearwater Lake had been searched thoroughly in 1986 and periodically in the years that followed, but this vehicle had remained hidden in deeper water, far from the areas that had been explored. The next morning, a specialized recovery team arrived with equipment designed to extract the vehicle without destroying potential evidence. News crews from Portland set up cameras along the shore. The discovery had captured regional attention, and speculation about what might be found inside the car dominated local conversations. Detective Morrison coordinated with forensic specialists and the county coroner's office. If human remains were present in the vehicle, proper protocols would need to be followed. The recovery operation would be delicate, methodical, and potentially heartbreaking. As crews worked to stabilize the vehicle for extraction, preliminary examinations revealed it to be a sedan from the mid-1980s. The make and model would require further cleaning to confirm, but initial assessments suggested it had been submerged for approximately 3 to 4 decades. Paint residue indicated it had once been dark blue or black. The community watched and waited. For many longtime residents, minds immediately went to unsolved cases from the 1980s. Clearwater Lake had been associated with tragedy and mystery for 37 years. Now, as drought forced the lake to surrender what it had hidden, there was both hope for answers and fear of what those answers might reveal. On the third day of the recovery operation, the vehicle was finally ready for extraction. A crane carefully lifted the sedan from its muddy grave, water and sediment pouring from every opening. As the car emerged fully into daylight for the first time in decades, gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. Even covered in mud and corrosion, even damaged by time and water, the vehicle told a story. This had not simply rolled into the lake accidentally. The location, the depth, the circumstances all suggested something far more deliberate. And as water continued to drain from the interior, investigators could see through the murky windows that the vehicle was not empty. Detective Morrison stood at the edge of the scene, her mind racing through possibilities and protocols. Whatever had happened here, whatever had led to this vehicle resting at the bottom of Clearwater Lake for nearly 4 decades, the truth was finally beginning to emerge. But the full picture would prove to be far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. August 2023, Lakewood Police Department Forensic Facility. The vehicle extracted from Clearwater Lake was transported under heavy security to a specialized forensic facility in Portland, approximately 40 miles from Lakewood. The sedan, identified as a 1984 Chevrolet Impala, had been registered to a man named Gregory Patterson, a former Lakewood resident who had himself been reported missing in May 1986, just 2 weeks after Ethan Cooper's disappearance. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Detective Morrison immediately began pulling files related to Gregory Patterson's case. The 42-year-old had worked as an accountant for a local manufacturing firm and lived alone in a modest house on Cedar Avenue, less than half a mile from the Cooper family residence. His disappearance had been treated as a possible voluntary departure, as personal belongings and some clothing were missing from his home, suggesting he had left intentionally. The forensic examination of the vehicle began under the supervision of Dr. Amanda Chen, a specialist in underwater forensics and decomposition. The process would be painstaking, as decades of submersion had created unique preservation challenges. Every item, every surface, every fragment had to be carefully documented and analyzed. Within the first day of examination, the team made a critical discovery. Human remains were present in the driver's seat area, consistent with an adult male. The skeleton showed no obvious signs of trauma that would indicate violent death, though Dr. Chen cautioned that soft tissue decomposition and the effects of prolonged water exposure could have obscured certain evidence. But it was the second discovery that transformed the investigation entirely. In the trunk of the vehicle, forensic technicians found the corroded frame of a small bicycle. The distinctive remnants of red paint, though faded and deteriorated, were still visible in places. Most significantly, reflective tape fragments remained attached to what had been the handlebars, matching the exact description from the 1986 missing person report for Ethan Cooper. The implications were immediately clear and deeply disturbing. The bicycle's presence in Gregory Patterson's vehicle could not be coincidental. Detective Morrison contacted Jennifer Cooper, now 68 years old and still living in Lakewood, to inform her that developments in her son's case required her to view photographs of items recovered from the lake. Jennifer arrived at the police station with her daughter Mia, now 45. When shown images of the bicycle frame, Jennifer's reaction left no doubt. Despite the deterioration, she recognized specific details: the particular placement of the reflective tape that her husband had applied, a small repair weld on the frame that had been necessary after Ethan had damaged it the previous summer. Even the unusual pattern of the remaining paint chips matched her memory perfectly. Further examination of the vehicle revealed additional crucial evidence. Forensic analysts discovered small bone fragments in the trunk area, separate from the bicycle. DNA extraction from these fragments would take several weeks, but preliminary analysis indicated they belonged to a juvenile, approximately 10 to 12 years of age. The investigation team began reconstructing events from 1986. Detective Morrison pulled Gregory Patterson's original missing person file, which had been remarkably thin. Patterson's employer had reported him absent from work for 3 consecutive days without notification. When police conducted a welfare check, they found his house appeared lived in but unoccupied. Mail had accumulated. His car was not in the garage. A neighbor reported last seeing him on a Saturday afternoon in early May. Most significantly, the original file contained a brief notation that Patterson had been interviewed as part of the Ethan Cooper investigation. He had lived in the neighborhood and had been home on the day of Ethan's disappearance. When questioned by Detective Hayes in April 1986, Patterson stated he had been working in his garage that afternoon and had neither seen nor heard anything unusual. He had appeared cooperative and had no criminal record. There had been no reason to consider him a suspect, and the brief interview had been just one of dozens conducted with neighborhood residents. Now, 37 years later, that seemingly routine interview took on horrifying new significance. Detective Morrison obtained a warrant to search property records and began investigating whether Patterson had owned other properties or had connections to other locations where evidence might have been hidden. The forensic team also made discoveries about the vehicle itself that painted a disturbing picture. Examination of the car's mechanical systems revealed that the engine had been running when it entered the water. Analysis of the steering column and gear shift indicated the vehicle had been deliberately driven into the lake, not accidentally rolled in. The trajectory and final position suggested Patterson had driven from a specific access point on the eastern shore, an area that had been heavily wooded in 1986 and was seldom visited. As DNA analysis proceeded, investigators began building a timeline. Gregory Patterson had lived in Lakewood for 8 years before his disappearance. He had moved to Oregon from California in 1978, following a divorce. Employment records showed steady work history, and neighbors described him as quiet and unremarkable. No one had suspected anything unusual about the man who lived in the house on Cedar Avenue, but deeper investigation revealed troubling patterns. Detective Morrison contacted law enforcement in Patterson's previous California jurisdiction. Records from the 1970s showed that Patterson had been investigated, though never charged, in connection with complaints about his behavior around children at a community center where he had volunteered. The investigation had been dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the complaints had been enough to end his volunteer work. This information had never been shared with Oregon authorities when Patterson relocated, a common problem in the pre-digital era of law enforcement communication. Had Detective Hayes known about these prior complaints in 1986, Patterson would have received much closer scrutiny during the Ethan Cooper investigation. The forensic examination continued to yield evidence. Inside the vehicle's glove compartment, investigators found a waterlogged notebook. Preservation specialists worked carefully to separate and dry the pages. Though much of the content had been destroyed by water damage, some fragments remained legible, revealing notes and observations that suggested disturbing premeditation and planning. As preliminary DNA results arrived, confirming that the juvenile remains belonged to Ethan Cooper, the investigation shifted from a missing person case to a homicide investigation. The Cooper family would finally have answers, though those answers brought unbearable pain alongside a measure of closure. Yet even with these revelations, critical questions remained unanswered. The exact sequence of events, the location where the crime had occurred, and the specific circumstances that led Gregory Patterson to drive into Clearwater Lake with both his victim and himself still required investigation. And as detectives continued examining Patterson's background and the evidence from the vehicle, they would discover that this case held even darker secrets than anyone had initially imagined. September 2023, multi-agency investigation. As the investigation into Gregory Patterson intensified, Detective Morrison assembled a task force that included specialists from the FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team, forensic psychologists, and investigators experienced in cold cases. The focus shifted to understanding not just what happened in 1986, but piecing together the full scope of Patterson's activities and whether there might be additional victims. The search of Patterson's former residence on Cedar Avenue, now owned by different occupants who had purchased the property in 1987, yielded unexpected results. With the current owner's permission, investigators brought ground-penetrating radar equipment to scan the property. The technology, unavailable in 1986, could detect disturbances in the soil that might indicate buried items or structural anomalies. The scan revealed an irregularity beneath the concrete floor of the detached garage. When excavation began, investigators discovered a hidden compartment approximately 4 feet deep, accessible through a section of concrete that had been poured as a separate panel designed to be removed. Inside this space, sealed in plastic containers, they found hundreds of photographs, notebooks filled with detailed observations, and personal items that did not belong to Patterson. The photographs, though disturbing in their invasion of privacy, did not depict illegal activity. They showed children in public places, parks, schools, shopping centers. The images had been taken covertly over what appeared to be several years. Many of the children photographed were identified as Lakewood residents during the 1980s. The notebooks contained observations about schedules, habits, and routines, revealing a pattern of surveillance that had gone completely undetected. Among the items recovered, investigators found a small toy car that Jennifer Cooper immediately recognized as having belonged to Ethan. He had carried it in his pocket frequently, a habit his mother had often teased him about. The presence of this item in Patterson's hidden cache, along with other personal objects that were traced to different children in the community, painted a chilling picture of calculated predatory behavior. The investigation team reached out to families whose children appeared in the photographs or whose belongings had been found in the cache. Many of these individuals were now adults in their 40s, living across the country. The interviews that followed revealed a pattern that had gone unnoticed in 1986. Several people recalled uncomfortable encounters with a man matching Patterson's description during their childhood, instances of unwanted attention or inappropriate conversation that had seemed merely odd at the time but took on sinister significance in retrospect. One particularly crucial interview involved a woman named Angela Martinez, who had been 13 years old in 1986. She had never been questioned during the original investigation into Ethan's disappearance, but she now came forward with information that proved vital. Angela recalled seeing Gregory Patterson talking with Ethan near the lake on the afternoon of his disappearance. The interaction had seemed normal at the time, just a neighbor chatting with a local child, and Angela had thought nothing of it until she saw news coverage of the vehicle's discovery and Patterson's photograph. Angela's account corroborated the timeline investigators had been developing. She remembered the encounter occurred around 3 p.m, placing Patterson and Ethan together approximately 1 hour before Ethan's mother had reported him missing. This was the first eyewitness account that directly connected Patterson to Ethan on the day of the disappearance, filling a critical gap in the timeline. Further investigation into Patterson's background revealed additional troubling information. Financial records showed that in the months before his disappearance, Patterson had been facing serious problems at work. An internal audit at his employer had discovered significant irregularities in accounts he managed. The investigation was ongoing in early 1986, and Patterson had been scheduled for a formal interview with company executives and potentially law enforcement in June 1986. This financial pressure provided additional context for Patterson's actions. Facing potential criminal charges for embezzlement, and with his predatory activities possibly at risk of exposure, Patterson may have felt his carefully constructed life was collapsing. The timing of Ethan's disappearance and Patterson's own death appeared to coincide with this period of escalating crisis. Forensic analysis of the recovered notebooks revealed entries that suggested Patterson had been planning his actions carefully. While many pages had deteriorated beyond recognition, recovered fragments indicated he had been watching Ethan for several weeks before the disappearance. References to the boy's bicycle, his route to the lake, and his habits appeared throughout the legible portions of the notebook. The investigation also uncovered that Patterson had made several trips to Clearwater Lake in the weeks before May 1986, ostensibly for fishing. Witnesses from the time, re-interviewed in 2023, recalled seeing him at the lake during hours when few other people were present. He had apparently been scouting the location, identifying the remote Eastern Shore access point that would later serve as the entry point for his vehicle into the water. Dr. Amanda Chen's forensic team made additional discoveries about the sequence of events based on evidence from the vehicle. Analysis of sediment patterns and the position of remains suggested that Ethan had already died before being placed in the trunk with his bicycle. The cause of death could not be definitively determined due to decomposition, but there was no evidence of violent trauma to the recovered bones. The investigation revealed that Patterson had likely kept Ethan at his residence for a period of time before driving to the lake. Forensic analysis of the hidden garage compartment revealed trace evidence consistent with this theory. The exact duration remained unclear, but investigators believed it had been less than 24 hours based on the timeline of sightings and Patterson's work schedule. The decision to drive into the lake appeared to have been Patterson's final act. Analysis suggested he had sedated himself before entering the water, as prescription medication bottles found in the vehicle contained pills prescribed to Patterson for anxiety. The vehicle had continued running as it sank, ensuring that both Patterson and the evidence of his crime would be hidden in the deep water. As September turned to October, the investigation had answered many questions about what happened to Ethan Cooper. But the emotional impact on the community, and particularly on the Cooper family, was profound. Jennifer Cooper, who had waited 37 years for answers, now faced the devastating confirmation that her son had been murdered by a neighbor she had seen regularly, a man who had attended community events and lived an apparently normal life, just houses away from her family. The case also raised difficult questions about systemic failures. How had Patterson's prior history in California not followed him to Oregon? Why had his suspicious behavior not triggered closer scrutiny? What warning signs had been missed by a community that had trusted him simply because he appeared respectable and ordinary? As investigators prepared their final report and the case moved toward official closure, one truth became painfully clear. The man who had taken Ethan Cooper's life had hidden in plain sight, protected by the assumption that monsters do not look like ordinary neighbors. And the lake that had concealed his crime for nearly 4 decades had finally, through an act of nature, forced the truth into the light where it could no longer be denied or ignored. October 2023, Case Reconstruction and Final Evidence. As autumn arrived in Lakewood, the investigative team assembled the final pieces of evidence that would complete the timeline of Ethan Cooper's last day. The combined efforts of forensic specialists, behavioral analysts, and detectives had produced a comprehensive reconstruction of the events of April 26, 1986, revealing the calculated nature of Gregory Patterson's actions and the tragic vulnerability that had led to Ethan's death. Digital forensics specialists had been working to recover data from the deteriorated notebooks found in Patterson's hidden garage compartment. Using advanced imaging technology unavailable in previous decades, they were able to reveal text from pages that appeared completely destroyed. These recovered writings provided disturbing insight into Patterson's mindset and planning in the days leading up to the crime. The notebooks revealed that Patterson had been observing Ethan for approximately 6 weeks before the disappearance. He had documented the boy's routines, including his frequent bicycle rides to Clearwater Lake, his habit of going alone when friends were unavailable, and the approximate times he typically left home on weekend afternoons. Patterson had specifically noted that Ethan often took a particular trail through the woods, a route that was somewhat isolated and would provide opportunity for an unwitnessed encounter. Evidence recovered from Patterson's former residence, combined with witness testimony from Angela Martinez and others, allowed investigators to piece together the sequence of events. On that April afternoon, Patterson had positioned himself along Ethan's known route to the lake. The encounter had likely seemed innocuous initially, a neighbor offering help or engaging in casual conversation. By the time Ethan realized something was wrong, he was already in a situation from which he could not escape. Forensic evidence suggested that Patterson had taken Ethan to his residence on Cedar Avenue, specifically to the garage where the hidden compartment would later be discovered. The duration of time Ethan spent there remained unclear, but investigators believed it had been several hours based on analysis of various factors, including the timeline of sightings and the condition of evidence recovered from the scene. The medical examiner's report, while limited by the effects of decades of submersion and decomposition, indicated that Ethan's death had likely resulted from asphyxiation. No signs of violent trauma were evident on the skeletal remains, suggesting that Patterson had not used physical force in the traditional sense. This finding, while providing some small measure of relief that Ethan had not suffered prolonged physical violence, still represented a devastating confirmation for the Cooper family. Analysis of Patterson's activities in the hours following the crime revealed careful planning. Neighbors reported seeing his car in his driveway late that evening, but by the following morning, both Patterson and his vehicle were gone. Investigators now understood that Patterson had spent those nighttime hours preparing for his final act, loading Ethan's body and bicycle into the trunk of his Impala and making the decision to drive to Clearwater Lake. The choice of location carried particular significance. Patterson had selected the Eastern Shore access point specifically because it was remote, heavily wooded, and rarely visited. In 1986, this area had no security cameras, no nearby residences, and limited visibility from other parts of the lake. The steep drop-off near the shore meant that a vehicle entering the water would quickly sink to significant depth. Examination of the lake bed where the vehicle had rested for 37 years revealed additional details. The car had come to rest approximately 60 feet below the surface at what had been the normal water level in 1986. This depth explained why sonar searches conducted in the weeks after Ethan's disappearance had not detected it. The search patterns had focused on areas closer to the public beach and main access points, not the remote eastern shore, and the technology available at the time had limitations that prevented detection at greater depths. The investigation also revealed the extent to which the original 1986 investigation had come frustratingly close to the truth. Detective Hayes had questioned Patterson, had conducted searches in and around the lake, and had pursued numerous leads that, with the benefit of hindsight, pointed toward the correct conclusion. But without physical evidence, without witnesses who recognized the significance of what they had seen, and without knowledge of Patterson's concerning history from California, the pieces had not come together in time. Records from Patterson's employer provided additional context for his actions. The internal audit that had discovered financial irregularities in his accounts had been scheduled to conclude with a formal report in early June 1986. Patterson had been aware that criminal charges were likely forthcoming. His personnel file contained notes from supervisors indicating that his behavior had become increasingly erratic in the weeks before his disappearance, though no one had connected this behavioral change to anything beyond stress about the impending audit. Psychological profiles developed by forensic specialists painted a picture of a man whose carefully controlled facade had been crumbling under multiple pressures. The financial investigation threatened his reputation and freedom. His predatory behaviors, which he had apparently managed to conceal for years, may have felt increasingly difficult to contain. The encounter with Ethan, whether planned in detail or representing an impulsive act built on prior obsession, had created a situation from which Patterson saw no acceptable exit. The decision to drive into the lake represented Patterson's final calculation. By taking his own life in the same act that concealed his victim, he ensured that the truth would remain hidden while avoiding the consequences of his actions. He had likely anticipated that both he and the vehicle would remain undiscovered indefinitely, buried in the deep waters of Clearwater Lake, where they could neither be found nor provide evidence of what had occurred. For 37 years, his plan had worked. The lake had kept its secrets, even as search parties scoured the area, even as the community mourned and wondered, even as technology advanced and investigative techniques improved. Only the unprecedented drought of 2023, an act of nature beyond anyone's control or prediction, had finally broken the silence and allowed the truth to emerge. As the investigation prepared to close, the weight of these revelations settled over everyone involved. The Cooper family finally had answers, but those answers brought pain alongside closure. The community had to confront the reality that evil had lived among them, unrecognized and unsuspected. And the case stood as a stark reminder of how much had changed in law enforcement practices, background check procedures, and interagency communication in the decades since 1986. Changes that might have prevented this tragedy had they existed at the time. The lake that had concealed Gregory Patterson's crime for nearly 4 decades now stood as a memorial to the boy whose life had been stolen and to the truth that time and nature had finally revealed. And as investigators prepared their final reports, one inescapable conclusion remained. Justice, though delayed by circumstances beyond anyone's control, had finally arrived for Ethan Cooper. November 2023, Lakewood, Oregon, case closure. On November 15, 2023, the Lakewood Police Department, in conjunction with the FBI and the Oregon State Medical Examiner's Office, held a press conference to announce the official closure of the Ethan Cooper case. Detective Sarah Morrison stood before assembled media and community members to present the findings of the 4-month investigation that had finally answered questions that had haunted the town for 37 years. The case was classified as a homicide committed by Gregory Patterson, who had died by his own hand in the commission of the crime. While Patterson could not face trial due to his death in 1986, the evidence collected allowed investigators to conclude the case with certainty about what had occurred and who was responsible. The announcement brought a measure of closure to a community that had lived with uncertainty and grief for nearly 4 decades. Jennifer Cooper, now 68 years old, attended the press conference alongside her daughter Mia. The family released a statement expressing gratitude to investigators, particularly those who had never stopped searching for answers despite the passage of time. For Jennifer, the confirmation of Ethan's fate, while devastating, resolved the agonizing uncertainty that had defined much of her adult life. She now had the opportunity to lay her son to rest properly and to honor his memory with the knowledge of what had actually happened on that April day in 1986. The impact on the Lakewood community extended beyond the Cooper family. Many residents who had lived through the original disappearance and search found themselves processing complicated emotions. Relief that the mystery had been solved, mixed with anger that the truth had been hidden so close by, that the perpetrator had been someone they had known and trusted. The revelation of Patterson's hidden surveillance activities and the discovery of items belonging to other children in his cache prompted difficult conversations about safety, awareness, and the assumptions communities make about their neighbors. The case prompted immediate action on multiple fronts. The Lakewood Police Department announced a comprehensive review of all unsolved missing person cases from the 1980s and 1990s, utilizing modern forensic techniques and databases that had not existed during the original investigations. Several other jurisdictions in Oregon and neighboring states initiated similar reviews, recognizing that technological advances might provide new leads in cases that had long gone cold. The Cooper family, working with local officials and community leaders, established the Ethan Cooper Memorial Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting families of missing children and funding advanced forensic research. The foundation partnered with law enforcement agencies to provide resources for cold case investigations and to maintain databases of missing persons that could be cross-referenced as new technologies became available. The drought that had exposed Patterson's vehicle and ultimately solved the case also sparked broader environmental discussions. Scientists noted that climate change was increasing the frequency and severity of extreme weather events, including droughts that could reveal long-hidden evidence in bodies of water across the country. Law enforcement agencies began coordinating with environmental agencies to systematically document and investigate discoveries made when water levels dropped in lakes, rivers, and reservoirs. In December 2023, Ethan Cooper was finally laid to rest in Lakewood Memorial Cemetery. The funeral, held 37 years after his death, drew hundreds of community members. Many who attended had been children themselves when Ethan disappeared and now brought their own families to honor his memory. The red Schwinn bicycle that Jennifer had kept in her basement for decades was restored and placed on permanent display at the Lakewood Community Center as part of a memorial exhibit dedicated to Ethan's life and the importance of child safety awareness. The legal ramifications of the case extended beyond the criminal investigation. The Cooper family, represented by attorney David Martinez, filed a civil lawsuit against the Lakewood Police Department, alleging negligence in the original 1986 investigation. The lawsuit specifically cited the failure to adequately investigate Gregory Patterson despite his proximity to the Cooper residence, the incomplete background check that failed to reveal his concerning history in California, and the limited scope of the lake search that had not included the area where his vehicle was ultimately found. After months of negotiation, the city reached a settlement with the Cooper family without admitting wrongdoing. The settlement included a financial component, but more significantly, it mandated comprehensive reforms to missing person investigation protocols, enhanced background check procedures, and improved interagency information sharing. These reforms were designed to prevent future cases from experiencing the same investigative gaps that had allowed Patterson to avoid detection in 1986. The case also prompted legislative action at the state level. Oregon lawmakers introduced the Ethan Cooper Act, legislation requiring standardized protocols for missing child investigations, mandatory reporting of concerning behavior involving children across jurisdictional boundaries, and the creation of a statewide database for tracking such reports. The act passed unanimously and became law in 2024, serving as a model for similar legislation in other states. As 2024 began, Clearwater Lake returned to its normal water levels following autumn rains. The area where Patterson's vehicle had rested for decades was once again submerged, but the lake itself had been transformed in the community's consciousness. No longer was it simply the beautiful natural feature that had drawn residents and visitors for generations. It was now a place of memory, a reminder of both tragedy and the eventual emergence of truth. The drought that had revealed the vehicle was studied extensively by climate scientists and law enforcement professionals. The intersection of environmental change and criminal investigation became a subject of academic research and professional training. Multiple law enforcement agencies developed protocols for responding to discoveries made during extreme weather events, recognizing that nature itself could be an ally in solving cold cases. For Jennifer Cooper, the resolution of her son's case brought complex emotions. The pain of knowing what Ethan had endured in his final hours was immense, yet the certainty was preferable to the endless uncertainty that had defined so many years. She channeled her grief into the foundation bearing Ethan's name, working to ensure that other families might receive answers more quickly than she had, and that the memory of her son would contribute to positive change. Detective Sarah Morrison, who had led the investigation, reflected on the case as a defining moment in her career. The investigation had demonstrated the importance of persistence, the value of modern forensic technology, and the reality that truth, no matter how long delayed, could still emerge. The lessons learned from the case informed her approach to every subsequent investigation and reinforced her commitment to giving voice to victims and answers to families. As the seasons changed and life in Lakewood continued, the community carried forward the memory of Ethan Cooper and the knowledge that had emerged from the depths of Clearwater Lake. The case stood as a testament to the resilience of those who seek truth, the advancement of investigative science, and the unpredictable ways that nature and human persistence can combine to reveal secrets that seemed permanently hidden. The boy who had disappeared on a spring afternoon in 1986, whose fate had remained unknown through decades of wondering and searching, had finally been found. And though the truth brought pain, it also brought the justice that Ethan Cooper deserved, and the closure that his family and community had sought for 37 years. The lake had kept its secret for a generation, but in the end, even the deepest waters could not hide the truth forever.